The city was a kingdom of glittering lights, and from his home in the clouds, the man they called Arthur Sterling was its king. His home wasn't a house with a garden. It was a penthouse. A vast space of cool marble and enormous windows that showed all of Manhattan laid out, like a carpet of stars. Everything was perfect, expensive, and silent. The air smelled of lemon polish and money. Arthur was a man who moved markets with a phone call, whose name was on buildings, and whose frown could make powerful people nervous. He had more money than he could ever spend, but in the echoing silence of his home, he had very little else. His world had once been full of laughter. His wife had filled the rooms with music and warmth. But a cruel twist of fate, a rainy night, and a car accident had taken her away. The music stopped, and the silence that replaced it was heavy and cold. The only piece of his wife he had left was their daughter, a little girl named Alara. She was 4 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a heart full of questions about a mother she could barely remember. In this world of cold luxury, the only real warmth came from a woman named Clara Johnson. Clara was the family maid. She had been hired by Arthur's wife before Alara was born, and after the terrible loss, she stayed. She was not just a cleaner or a cook. She became the steady heartbeat of the home. While Arthur buried his grief in piles of work and business deals, Clara was the one who held the family together. She was a quiet woman in her late 40s, with kind eyes and hands that were strong from a lifetime of work. Her uniform was always crisp and clean, but her true uniform was her calm presence. She knew that Alara's favorite sandwich was peanut butter with the crust cut off. She knew that the little girl was afraid of the dark and needed a specific nightlight, a little star that glowed blue. She knew the exact rhythm to pat Alara's back to help her fall asleep. She was the keeper of routines, the singer of lullabies, the mender of torn stuffed animals. Arthur, for all his power and wealth, was helpless when it came to these things. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world, but his love was often clumsy, expressed with expensive gifts instead of time. He trusted Clara completely. In a world where everyone wanted a piece of his fortune, Clara only seemed to want a fair wage and for little Alara to be happy and safe. She never asked for anything more. This trust was his greatest strength, but it was also about to become his biggest weakness. There was a serpent in Arthur's perfect, gilded world. His name was Julian, and he was Arthur's business partner. More than that, he was the brother of Arthur's late wife. He was a handsome man, always dressed in the finest suits, with a smile that was too smooth and too quick. He spoke in a calm, reassuring voice, and he had a way of agreeing with Arthur that made Arthur feel like he was the smartest man in the room. But behind the smile, Julian was a hollow man, filled with jealousy and greed. He watched Arthur's billions and thought, that should be mine. He believed he deserved it more. While Arthur was lost in grief, Julian saw an opportunity. He began, slowly and carefully, to steal from the company. He created fake companies, forged documents, and moved millions of dollars into secret accounts across the ocean. He was weaving a spider's web of lies, and Arthur was the fly, completely unaware. One day, a small detail in a financial report caught Arthur's eye. A number was wrong. It was a tiny thing, but Arthur had built his empire on noticing tiny things. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. He called Julian into his office. "Julian," he said, pointing to the report. "Do you see this? This doesn't look right." Julian's face was a perfect mask of concern. He leaned over, studied the paper, and shook his head. "It must be a glitch in the new software, Arthur. A simple error. I'll have the IT team look into it immediately." Don't worry yourself with such small things. But Arthur did worry. For the first time in a long time, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. He decided to launch a quiet, private audit of the company's finances. He told only a few trusted people. He did not know that one of those trusted people was loyal to Julian. The moment Julian heard about the audit, he knew his time was short. He had to act first. He had spent years preparing for this. He went to the authorities, but not as a suspect. He went as a concerned brother-in-law and partner, a man forced to do a terrible duty. He presented them with a box of forged documents and fake evidence, all meticulously crafted to point to one person, Arthur Sterling. He framed Arthur for massive fraud, for embezzlement, for cheating the government. Out of taxes, he painted a picture of a greedy billionaire who was stealing from his own company and was now trying to cover his tracks by blaming his loyal partner. The end came on a Tuesday evening. The sky outside the penthouse was turning a deep orange. Inside, a small, precious scene was unfolding. Arthur was on the floor of the living room, a place usually too pristine for such things. Alara was sitting in his lap, giggling as he did the voices for the characters in her favorite picture book. Clara was watching from the doorway, a small, soft smile on her face. It was a rare, perfect moment of normal happiness, The moment shattered with a loud, insistent buzz from the front door. Before Clara could even answer it, the door was pushed open. Men in dark suits with serious faces streamed into the room. They were federal agents. Arthur Sterling? The lead agent said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Alara whimpered and buried her face in her father's chest. Arthur stood up slowly, his body shielding his daughter. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice the powerful tone of a man used to being in charge. But these men did not work for him. The agent began to read his rights. The words fraud, embezzlement, and arrest echoed in the vast, silent room. Arthur's world was spinning. He couldn't understand what was happening. He saw Julian step out from behind the agents, his face a masterpiece of fake sorrow. "Arthur," Julian said, shaking his head sadly. "I tried to stop you. I begged you to come clean." The betrayal hit Arthur like a physical blow. He stared at his brother-in-law, the man he had trusted, the man he considered family. And in that moment, he saw the truth in his eyes. The greed, the hatred. He had been blind. The agents handcuffed his hands behind his back. The metal was cold and heavy. As they started to lead him away, he struggled, not against the agents, but to look back. His eyes, wide with a storm of shock, fear, and heartbreak, scanned the room. They found Clara. She was standing frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, her other arm instinctively wrapped around a crying Alara, holding her close. He couldn't speak. He couldn't form words, but his eyes, locked with Clara's, held a desperate, screaming plea. It was a message sent straight from a father's breaking heart. It wasn't about his money, his company, or his freedom. It was a single, powerful, silent command. "My daughter." Then he was gone, let out of his home, and the giant door closed with a final, heavy thud. The glittering kingdom of lights was now just a view from a prison. The only sounds left in the penthouse were Alara's frightened sobs, and the deafening silence of a life destroyed. Clara held the little girl tighter, her own heart pounding. She had seen the plea in Arthur's eyes, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the real danger was just beginning. Just the days after Arthur was taken away felt empty and strange, like the world had lost all its color. The big penthouse was too quiet. The only sound was Alara's soft crying, or her small voice asking, "When is Papa coming back?" Clara did not have a good answer. She would just hold the little girl close, her heart feeling heavy as a stone. The legal machine, cold and impersonal, began to turn. A judge, looking at papers filled with lies, decided Arthur was too much of a risk to let out. He was sent to Rikers Island to wait for his trial, a place known for being tough and frightening. He was trapped out meanwhile. The man who had caused all the trouble was busy putting on a show. Julian, wearing a suit that cost more than most people make in a month, went to the family court. He looked sad and serious. He spoke to the judge with a voice full of fake concern. "Your Honor," he said. His head bowed a little to seem respectful. "My brother-in-law's actions have broken my heart, but my only concern now is that sweet, innocent little girl. She has lost her mother, and now her father is unavailable. I am her only family, her only blood relative. It is my duty, and my honor, to step in and provide a stable home for her." The judge, seeing a well-dressed, seemingly responsible uncle, agreed. The papers were signed. Temporary custody of Alara was given to Julian. When Clara heard the news, a cold fear trickled down her spine. She had seen the real look in Julian's eyes when Arthur was arrested. She did not trust him. A week later, a woman from the social services office came to the penthouse. Her job was to oversee the transition. She told Clara in a polite but firm voice that her services were no longer required. The penthouse was being sealed by the courts. Julian was now the boss, and he did not need a maid. "But, Alara," Clara had said, her voice tight. "She knows me. I am a familiar face." This is already so scary for her. The social worker, a woman who had seen too many difficult situations, just shrugged. "I'm sorry. It's out of my hands. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Julian Sterling is the legal guardian now." Clara was given a small severance pay and told to pack her personal things. As she folded her few simple dresses and placed a picture of her own family into a suitcase, she felt a deep panic. How could she just leave? Who would make sure Alara ate her vegetables? Who would know that she needed a glass of water left on the bedside table at night? Who would protect her from the coldness she felt in Julian? She couldn't. It was as simple as that. She couldn't walk away. Using the small amount of money she had saved over the years, she did something drastic. She rented a tiny, one-room apartment in the Bronx. It was a long subway ride from the glittering world of Manhattan. The apartment was old, and the paint was chipped. At night, she could hear the sounds of the city through the thin walls, cars, people, life. It was a world away from the silent penthouse. But it was a base, it was a place to fight from next. She started calling the social worker every single day. She was not rude, but she was persistent. "Hello, it's Clara Johnson again," she would say. "I just wanted to see how Alara is doing. Is she eating? Is she sleeping?" At first, the social worker was short with her, but Clara's quiet, steady concern began to wear down her resistance. Clara wasn't asking for money or for her job back. She was only asking about the well-being of a child she loved. Finally, after many calls, the social worker agreed. "All right," she said with a sigh. "I will list you as a family friend. You can have visiting rights at Mr. Sterling's home, but you must understand, it is at his discretion, and any trouble, and this stops." It was a small victory, but it was everything. The first time Clara went to Julian's brownstone, her stomach was in knots. From the outside, it was beautiful, made of old, elegant brick, but inside, it felt different from the penthouse. The penthouse had been cold because it was empty of love. This place was cold because it was filled with a kind of pride. Everything was expensive, but it felt like a museum, not a home. There were no toys on the floor, no childish drawings on the refrigerator. Alara, when she saw Clara, ran to her and wrapped her small arms around her legs, holding on tightly. She was quiet, more quiet than Clara had ever seen her. Julian was there, smiling his smooth, empty smile. "Clara, so good of you to come and visit," he said. But his eyes were saying something else. They were saying, "What are you doing here?" During her visits, Clara watched everything. She saw how Julian barely looked at Alara. He didn't ask her about her day. He didn't kneel down to talk to her. He spoke to her from a height, his voice impatient. He hired a nanny, a young woman who seemed more interested in her phone than in the little girl she was supposed to be watching. Clara's role shifted. She was no longer a maid. During her visits, she would get down on the floor and play with Alara. She would help her with her colors. She would read to her. She was trying to be an island of safety in this strange, cold new world. One afternoon, she was in the large living room, helping Alara build a tower with blocks. Julian was in his study, which was connected by a hallway. He thought he was alone, talking loudly on the phone. The nanny was in another room. Clara, quiet as always, heard every word. His voice was different now. It wasn't the fake, polite tone he used in front of others. It was low, sharp, and full of a nasty joy. "The last of the shares are almost transferred to me," he was saying. "Once the company is completely mine, the final piece of the puzzle will be locked in." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. Then he laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The kid," he said, his voice dropping to a sneer. "She's the key to it all right now. The courts gave her to me, which helped prove I'm the stable one. But once everything is finalized, she's just a liability. A noisy, messy complication." Another pause. Clara's blood ran cold. She stopped breathing, her hand frozen in midair, holding a red block. "Oh, don't worry about that," Julian continued, his voice casual, as if he were talking about taking out the trash. "There are places for difficult children, special institutions. Once I have full control, she can be someone else's problem. Out of sight, out of mind." Clara felt a wave of sickness wash over her. This was worse than she had ever imagined. He wasn't just a thief who wanted money. He was a monster. He saw a sweet, scared little girl not as a person, but as a tool he was planning to use and then throw away when he was done. He wasn't just going to take Arthur's money and his company. He was going to take his child and destroy her life, locking her away somewhere terrible. Just to be rid of her. The red block slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the wooden floor. The sound seemed incredibly loud in the silent room. Alara looked up, her big eyes worried. "Clara, are you okay?" Clara forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird. She reached out and smoothed the little girl's hair. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. I remembered something very important I have to do." She knew now, with a terrible and certain clarity, that the police or social services could not help her. Julian had fooled them all. He had money and power on his side. Her word against his was nothing. No one would believe the word of a maid over a powerful billionaire. She was alone, but she was not giving up. The silent promise she had made to Arthur's desperate eyes in the penthouse now burned inside her, brighter and fiercer than ever. She had to find a way to stop this. She had to find a way to save Alara. There was no one else. The words Clara had overheard played in her mind like a terrible song on repeat. Institutions for difficult children. Out of sight, out of mind. They haunted her while she rode the noisy subway back to her small apartment. They kept her awake at night, echoing in the silence. The fear was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. She knew time was running out for Lara. She thought about going to the police. But what would she say? I heard a rich and powerful man talking on the phone. He would simply deny it. He would say she was a disgruntled former employee trying to cause trouble. They would believe his smooth lies over her simple truth. She had no proof. Nothing but the fear in her heart and the memory of a father's desperate, silent plea. Her only hope, she realized, was Arthur himself. He was the only other person who knew what Julian was truly capable of. He was the only one who might know where to find a weakness, a secret, something they could use to fight back. But Arthur was locked away in one of the most famous and dangerous jails in the world. Getting a message to him seemed impossible. She looked up the rules for visiting Rikers Island. The process was complicated and discouraging. She had to get on an official visitor list. She was not family. Why would they let her in? She filled out the forms online anyway, her heart sinking as she typed. She knew it was a long shot. Days turned into a week. She visited Alara at Julian's cold brownstone, playing with her, watching her smile for the little girl hiding a storm of worry inside. Each time she left, it felt harder and harder to walk away. One afternoon, returning from a visit, she saw a piece of official-looking mail in her small mailbox. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was from the Department of Correction. Her visitor application had been rejected. The reason stated, not an immediate family member. The paper felt heavy in her hand. It was a door slamming shut. She stood in the dim hallway of her apartment building, feeling completely alone. The walls felt like they were closing in. What could she do now? But then, a stubborn thought rose in her mind. She had to try. She couldn't just give up. Even if her application was rejected, she would go to the jail. She would find a way. She had to look someone in the eye and beg. The next day, she took the long, complicated subway ride to the bus that would take her to Rikers Island. The journey felt like traveling to another country. The bus was full of other women, their faces etched with worry and sadness. They all shared the same heavy silence. The visiting center was a large, noisy, and oppressing place. The air smelled of old coffee and cleaning chemicals. The lights were too bright. People were shouting, babies were crying, and the sound of metal doors clanging shut echoed through the hall. Clara felt small and lost in the chaos. She waited in a long line until she reached a window with a thick glass panel. A tired-looking corrections officer sat on the other side. Name? He asked, not looking up from his computer screen. Clara Johnson. I'm here to see Arthur Sterling. The officer typed, his fingers tapping loudly. He frowned. You're not on the list. I know. I applied, but I was rejected. Please, sir. It is very important. It's about his little daughter. Lady, if you're not on the list, you're not getting in. It's that simple. Rules are rules. Next, he said, his voice flat and final. Clara's shoulders slumped. She moved away from the window, her eyes stinging with tears of frustration. She found a hard plastic chair in a corner and sat down, not knowing what to do next. She just watched the sad parade of humanity around her. She noticed a young corrections officer guiding an elderly woman to a different line. He was different from the others. He wasn't yelling. He had a kind face, and he spoke to the old woman in a gentle, patient voice. He helped her find her way. Clara watched him for a while, gathering her courage. When he finished with the old woman and started walking back to his post, she stood up and stepped into his path. Excuse me, officer, she said, her voice soft. He stopped and looked at her. He saw a woman who was not dressed for this place, a woman with honest, frightened eyes. Can I help you, ma'am? My name is Clara Johnson, she began, her words tumbling out in a rush. I need to see Arthur Sterling. It's not for me. It's for his little girl, Alara. She's 4 years old. Her uncle has her now. The man who put Mr. Sterling in here. And I heard him say he's going to send her away. To some institution. He's a dangerous man. I just need 5 minutes. I just need to tell her father. He has a right to know. She was pleading now, her hands clasped together. The young officer, whose name was Ben, listened carefully. He heard a lot of stories in this place. Stories from people trying to cheat the system. But this felt different. The raw fear in this woman's voice felt real. It wasn't about drugs or money. It was about a child. He looked around quickly. He was new, and he didn't want to break the rules. But his heart told him this was important. I can't put you on the list, he said quietly, leaning closer. But Mr. Sterling has a visitation slot this afternoon. Be here at 2 o'clock. Wait in the line for his block. I'll be working that station. I'll see what I can do. It wasn't a promise, but it was a chance. Clara felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." She waited for hours, her stomach in knots. At 2 o'clock, she joined another line. Her heart leaped when she saw that the officer checking people in was the young man, Ben. When it was her turn, he gave her a small, almost invisible nod. He scanned her ID, typed something into his computer, and then waved her through. "Visiting booth 12, he said softly. She walked through the metal detectors and was led into a large room divided by thick glass panels. Each panel had a telephone on the wall. She sat down at booth 12, her heart pounding. A door on the other side of the glass opened, and Arthur was led in by another officer. Clara almost didn't recognize him. The confident, powerful man was gone. He was thinner. His expensive suit was replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He moved slowly, as if all the energy had been drained from him. He looked broken. He sat down and picked up the phone on his side without looking at her. He probably thought she was his lawyer. "Arthur," Clara said into her phone. He looked up. For a second, there was no recognition in his eyes. Then it clicked. "Clara." His voice was rough, scratchy. What are you doing here? Is Alara okay? Is she sick?" "She is physically fine," Clara said carefully, knowing that every word they said was probably being recorded. "She is living with your brother-in-law now." A flash of anger and pain crossed Arthur's face. "Julian," he spat the name out like it was poison. "He is her legal guardian," Clara said, choosing her words with extreme care. She couldn't say what she had overheard. "He is making plans for her future. He talks about new schools." Very far away, she looked directly into Arthur's eyes, trying to send him a message without words. She saw the confusion there. He was so defeated, he could barely think. Their time was almost up. A voice over a loudspeaker announced that visiting hours were ending. Clara felt a panic rising. She had failed. He didn't understand. As she stood up, an idea came to her. A memory from a happier time. A silly game they used to play with Alara when she was first learning her letters. They would tap the letters out on the table as simple code. Clara leaned forward towards the glass. She spoke a normal goodbye sentence. "I'll tell Alara that you miss her." But under the ledge of the counter, hidden from the view of the cameras and the guards, her right hand began to move. Her fingers tapped a frantic, deliberate rhythm on her knee. Tap dash tap dash tap 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 tap. It was the code for Tia. It was their old, silly code for the truth. As in, "I'm telling you the truth." Arthur's eyes, which had been downcast and dull, flickered. He had been about to hang up the phone. He stopped. He looked at her face, and then instinctively he glanced down at her hand. Though he couldn't see it, the memory connected. The game, the code. Truth, he understood. Something was very, very wrong. This was a secret message. This was a warning. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But the emptiness in his eyes was suddenly gone, replaced by a sharp, focused glint. The mind of the businessman, the fighter, was waking up. He gave one single, almost imperceptible nod. "I understand," he said into the phone, his voice low and steady for the first time. "Thank you for coming." He hung up the phone and was led away. But he walked differently now. His shoulders were straighter. The connection was made. The fight was not over. The visit to the jail left Clara feeling both hopeful and terrified. She had seen the spark of understanding in Arthur's eyes. He knew she was trying to tell him something important. But what could he do? Locked in a cell. And what could she do? With no money and no power. They were like two people trapped on opposite sides of a thick glass wall, able to see each other, but unable to break through. She replayed everything Arthur had ever told her, searching for a clue, a secret, anything that could help. Julian was a snake. But even snakes leave a trail. Arthur was a brilliant man. He would not have left himself completely defenseless. He must have suspected something, or at least, been cautious. Her mind kept going back to his late wife. Arthur had loved her deeply. Her name was Isabel. Her death had broken him. Clara remembered how, in the first months after the tragedy, Arthur would sometimes talk to her. Not as a boss to a maid, but as one grieving person to another. He had said strange, sad things. One evening, he had been looking at a picture of his wife and he muttered, almost to himself, "She was my true compass. Without her, I am lost. I feel like I buried my heart with her." At the time, Clara had thought it was just a figure of speech, a poetic way of saying he missed her. But now, the words echoed in her mind with a new meaning. I buried my heart with her. What if he wasn't just being poetic? Arthur was a practical man, a man of business. He trusted facts and documents, not just feelings. What if he had taken his wife's words, her suspicions, and hidden them somewhere safe? And what if buried my heart with her was not just a metaphor? What if it was a real, physical clue? It was a wild, crazy thought, but it was the only thread she had to pull. She knew where Isabel was buried. It was in a beautiful, old cemetery on the outskirts of the city, a quiet, peaceful place under a canopy of large, old trees. Clara decided to take Alara there. It was a risk, but she could tell Julian she was taking the girl to the park, and it was good for Alara to visit her mother. The next day was bright and sunny, but a cold wind blew. Clara bundled Alara up in a warm coat and took the long subway ride to the end of the line. They walked through the big iron gates of the cemetery. The silence there was different from the silence of the city. It was a respectful, gentle quiet. They found the grave. The headstone was simple and elegant, made of smooth, gray granite. It had Isabel's name, the dates of her birth and death, and a short, carved message, loved beyond words. Alara placed a small bunch of yellow flowers, her mother's favorite, at the base of the stone. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered, while Alara talked quietly to the headstone. Clara's eyes scanned every inch of it. It looked solid, permanent. There were no loose pieces, no hidden compartments she could see. Her heart began to sink. Her crazy idea was just that crazy dot. She walked slowly around the grave, her eyes on the ground. And then she saw it. At the very base of the headstone, partly hidden by the grass, was a small flat piece of granite. It was about the size of her hand. It looked like it was part of the foundation, but its edges were a little less worn than the stone around it. Her pulse quickened. She knelt down, pretending to tie her shoe. She glanced around. The cemetery was empty except for an old man far in the distance. She ran her fingers over the small flat stone. It felt slightly loose. With her heart hammering in her chest, she took her car keys from her pocket. She worked the metal key into the thin gap between the small stone and the larger one. She pushed and wiggled it. It was stuck tight with dirt and time. She pushed harder, her hands sweating. Suddenly, the small stone shifted. With a soft scraping sound, it came loose. Beneath it was not dirt, but a small, dark, empty space. And inside that space was a metal box. It was no bigger than a deck of cards, made of a black, weatherproof material. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had been right. She quickly grabbed the box, slipped it into her deep coat pocket, and pushed the small flat stone back into place. It looked perfectly normal again. No one would ever know it had been moved. "Clara, I'm cold," Alara said, hugging herself. "Okay, sweetheart, we can go now," Clara said, her voice shaking a little. She took Alara's hand, and they walked quickly out of the cemetery. The small box felt incredibly heavy in her pocket, like it held the weight of the entire world. At night, after she had put Alara to bed at Julian's house and returned to her own tiny apartment, she finally looked at the box. She sat at her small kitchen table, under the single, bright light, and opened it. Inside, protected from moisture and time, was a small USB drive. Her hands trembled as she plugged it into the old, slow computer at the public library the next day. She was afraid of what she might find. The USB drive contained only one file. It was a digital journal, written by Isabel. Clara started to read. The early entries were happy, filled with love for Arthur and excitement about their new baby. But as the months went on, the tone began to change. Isabel wrote about her brother, Julian. October 12th. Had dinner with Julian tonight. He seemed different. He kept asking Arthur very specific questions about the company's security protocols. Arthur joked it off, but it made me uncomfortable. Why does he need to know that? November 3rd. Julian was so bitter tonight. He said Arthur just got lucky and that he deserved a much larger share of the company. He's my brother, but the look in his eyes scared me. The entries became more and more worried. Isabel was clearly seeing a side of her brother that no one else did. Then, Clara read the final entry. It was dated just a week before the car accident. "I can't ignore this any longer. I went through Julian's briefcase today when he was visiting. I know it was wrong, but I had to know. I found notes, pages of numbers, account numbers that don't belong to our company, and a list of questions, all about how to bypass our financial controls. He is planning something. I feel sick. I have to tell Arthur. I'm going to tell him tomorrow after the board meeting. I'm so afraid. If anything happens to me, Arthur, look to Julian. I fear he is not the man we think he is." Clara sat back in the hard library chair, her hand over her mouth. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't proof of the financial crimes that would take teams of accountants, but it was proof of motive. It was proof that Julian had a plan, that he was dangerous. and that Isabel had suspected him before she died. This journal would make any judge, any investigator, look at Julian with new eyes. It would shatter his image as the grieving, responsible uncle. It could be the key to reopening the entire case and, most importantly, taking Alara away from him. But now Clara faced the biggest problem of all. How could she, a maid with no connections, get this evidence into the right hands? If she mailed it, it could get lost. If she took it to the police, Julian might find out and have it destroyed. She needed to give it to someone who was powerful, who was honest, and who Julian could not touch. She had the key to saving Alara and freeing Arthur. But now she had to find the one lock it would open. The small USB drive felt like a live wire in Clara's pocket. It held so much power, yet she felt more powerless than ever. She had the truth, but the world was built for people like Julian to tell lies. If she handed this to the wrong person, it would disappear forever. And so would any chance of saving Alara. For days, she thought of nothing else. She couldn't sleep. She would go to the library and read news articles on the computer, searching for a name, a face, someone who could not be bought or bullied. Then, she found it. An article in a major newspaper featured a retired judge. She was a woman known for a lifetime of tough, fair decisions. The article called her incorruptible and said that even after retirement, she was a powerful voice for justice. Her name was Margaret Owens. The article mentioned she was still involved in charity work, focusing on children's welfare. This was it. This was the person. Judge Margaret Owens had no reason to fear Julian. Her reputation was her armor. But how could Clara, a maid from the Bronx, ever get a meeting with a famous retired judge? She read further. The article mentioned that Judge Owens was the guest of honor at a big charity gala, happening in a few days. It was one of those events for the city's elite, a world of glittering gowns and tuxedos. The exact world Julian now lived in. He would definitely be there, showing off his new status. A dangerous, desperate plan began to form in Clara's mind. It was a crazy plan. It could go wrong in so many ways, but it was the only one she had. The night of the gala, Clara put on the best dress she owned. It was a simple, dark blue dress she had bought years ago for a family wedding. She looked presentable, but she felt like a ghost among the glittering people. She stood outside the Grand Hotel, watching the limousines pull up. Her heart was a drumbeat in her ears. She didn't have an invitation. She would have to find a way to slip inside. She waited near a side entrance where staff were bringing in extra supplies. When a waiter carrying a large tray of glasses went in, she simply walked in behind him, trying to look like she belonged. No one stopped her. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, the sound of a live orchestra, the murmur of laughing, talking people. It was a world she had only ever seen in movies. She scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for the faces. She saw Julian first. He was at the center of a group of people, holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly. He looked like a king who had just won his crown. The sight of him made her feel sick. Then she saw her. Judge Margaret Owens. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair. She stood with a quiet dignity, listening to someone speak, not needing to laugh loudly to be noticed. This was her chance. Clara started walking, her legs feeling weak. She weaved through the crowd, her eyes fixed on the judge. She was almost there when a large man in a suit, an event security guard, stepped in her path. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. He had seen she didn't quite fit in. Clara's mind went blank with panic. She was so close. She looked over the man's shoulder and saw the judge excuse herself from her group and walked towards the restroom. "Please," Clara whispered to the guard, her voice desperate. "I just need to use the ladies' room. I'm not feeling well." The guard looked at her pale face and stepped aside. "Of course, it's just over there." Clara almost ran. She pushed the door to the luxurious restroom open. It was empty, except for Judge Owens, who was washing her hands at the marble sink. The judge looked up in the mirror, surprised to see a woman so out of breath. Clara didn't waste a second. She walked forward, her hands trembling. "Judge Owens," she said, her voice low and urgent. "My name is Clara Johnson. I am sorry to bother you like this. I have nowhere else to go." The judge turned around, drying her hands. She didn't look angry, just curious. "What is this about, my dear?" "It's about the Arthur Sterling case. And his daughter, Alara. The man who has her now, her uncle Julian. He is not a good man. He is planning to hurt her, to send her away. I have proof." Clara's words tumbled out in a rush. She reached into her small purse and pulled out the USB drive. She held it out, her hand shaking. This was hidden by Arthur Sterling's wife, Isabel, before she died. It's her journal. She knew her brother was dangerous. She was afraid of him. Judge Owens looked from Clara's desperate, honest face down to the small device in her hand. She had spent a lifetime judging people, listening to lies and truths. She saw the raw, real fear in this woman's eyes. This was not a trick. This was a plea for help. She took the USB drive. Her fingers closed around it firmly. "I will look at this," she said, her voice calm and certain. "You have my word." That was all Clara needed to hear. She nodded, tears of relief welling in her eyes. She couldn't speak. She just turned and left the restroom, slipping out of the hotel the same way she came in, back into the quiet of the normal night. What happened next was like an avalanche. Slow to start, but impossible to stop. Judge Owens did not go to the police. She went to her contacts in the FBI and the press. She used her influence to launch a quiet, sealed investigation. The journal was the key that unlocked everything. Investigators started looking at Julian with new eyes. They followed the money trails Isabel had hinted at. They found the secret accounts, the forged documents. The whole web of lies began to unravel. It did not happen overnight. But one morning, a team of federal agents walked into Julian's office. He was on the phone, making another deal, another plan to get rid of Alara. The agents read him his rights. The look of shock on his face was something Clara would always cherish, even though she did not see it.